Hey, it's time for another edition of the Cseekly Recap. I'm your host Csomm, and I'm here to go a bit deeper into the topics that I've covered in my shorts. The footage behind is from the game Crimson Desert. Let's get the show on the road. Our first topic of the day is going to be all about Crimson Desert. It's a bit obvious because everybody is talking about it, but more importantly, I have a lot of things to say, so I guess it's only natural to tackle this particular topic. You could see it as a continuation from the last recap, because I already mentioned it there, or rather last week. So, I don't know, it seems natural to me to speak about these things. Anyway, as you're well aware, the game released on March 19, 2026. And even though I knew the release is going to happen, I still wasn't hyped about the game. I didn't have any expectations whatsoever. And to be honest, it's a healthy way to approach when you are trying to review a game, because if you are subjective to a point of everything is awesome and I just want to play it because I expected this game, or rather I was waiting for the game for so long, it's not going to be a good review, or at least in this case, first impressions. I have already witnessed people hyping this game to no end, so to me it was a breath of fresh air to approach this from a complete blank position. And that's what I did. I played the game around 8-10 hours and I produced my first impressions. By the way, you can check it if you want. I'll put link down below and also some kind of a floaty thing up there so you can click on it if you wanna. Anyway, it's safe to say that the game did not impress me at all. Fact being, I was actually surprised to see other people giving huge scores, over 80 or something like that. And for the first time in my life, I reckon I agreed with a review that was produced by these big-ass gaming sites like IGN, for example. I generally think their reviews are appalling, but for some strange reason, it appears that they are actually doing their job really good in this particular situation. Maybe they didn't get enough money, and they weren't sugarcoating it like they usually do. Anyway, enough about them. What I wanted to say is that while I was playing the game, I noticed several issues. Again, I need to emphasize this, I did not have any expectations from the game whatsoever. The only thing that I had, or rather I still have, is my experience of playing games my whole life. So naturally, when we are talking about this particular aspect of my, let's say, way of reviewing games, you do have certain expectations in terms of how systems should work based on the previous experience. Not to mention, you need to take into account certain things that the gaming industry already achieved and is now a standard how to do things. For example, we all know when you're playing on mouse and keyboard, for example, that you should have shortcuts to these specific menus like inventory, map, skills, stuff like that. This is completely normal to expect because we have been experiencing these things for years. So essentially, this is where my expectations are coming from. And that's how I approach any game that has the similarities of the games in the same genre. So in the case of Crimson Desert, because it's marketed as an open-world action-adventure game, I'm going to draw similarities and comparisons from the games that are marketed like that. One of these games is a Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. It's an action role-playing game. So in that sense, you expect to have certain things that Witcher 3 has. And to me, that's completely reasonable and a good benchmark to compare stuff. Obviously, I don't expect the level of story that The Witcher 3 has, but at the same time, why the hell not? Anyway, I started playing the game, and immediately I noticed several issues. First obvious problem were the controls, or rather the control scheme. To me, they made absolutely no sense whatsoever, and you can argue that its control scheme is a bit unorthodox and you should invest certain time in order to get used to the controls itself. And then we are coming back to the original point that I made in this particular video, which is we already have a very successful control scheme defined, even since The Witcher 3 was released, and then there were a fuck ton of games who already use the same control scheme. Latest example that I would use would be Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. The way that you operate your inventory, the way that you fight, the way that you interact with the world, the way that you interact with your horse. So to me, it was just so disappointing to see that they are trying to do something that absolutely has no sense whatsoever. Even though we have several examples how things are being handled in this particular department. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So, back when I was doing the first impression video, galloping couldn't be achieved normally by holding shift key. Instead, you had to press it like there's no tomorrow, continuously. There weren't any shortcuts. You couldn't open your menus just by pressing, let's say, I for inventory. You had to go to a separate menu and then find inventory and then click on the damn thing in order to open your inventory. These are the things that I'm talking about. So naturally, if the control scheme is messed up, everything is going to suffer no matter what you do because you use the controls to play the bloody game. That's why to me combat felt weird, interacting with the world felt weird, because it's all tied to this particular system. I mean, one simple example would be you interact with the NPCs. If you want to talk to a NPC that's a quest giver, you need to hold control in order to initiate another input, which is E, and then you can talk to the NPC. If you're thinking just approaching to the NPC and starting a conversation like that, you cannot, because there is an invisible circle like a force field that prevents you from doing so. Then I noticed that certain things, activities in this particular situation were overcomplicated for no apparent reason. One example I always give is the wood cutting. The process of getting materials from a tree is so exhausting. I could understand they are going for certain, I would assume, realism, but if you are going to do so, I very well expect a realistic outcome from cutting a tree and not getting, I don't know, 2 or 3 wood planks instead of whole damn tree having at least 10 wood planks in it. So in that sense, when I mentioned these things all over the internet on various forums and stuff, I was basically attacked by people saying that either I'm a hater or that the control scheme is basically a skill issue. And then a couple of days later, a CEO of a company, or rather developers, are saying that they're going to produce patches in order to fix the controls. And I'm thinking to myself, if the controls are perfect like majority of people are saying, then why are developers fixing these things? Because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But apparently it was broke as fuck, so naturally they have to fix it. Otherwise, you are not having a great time. And even today, as of recording of this video, a new patch just landed, I think patch 1.01, where they are addressing more issues when it comes to control scheme. Most notably, what I have seen is the galloping has been fixed in order to be more, I would say, natural or according to already established rules how to handle a horse or any mounted creature in that manner. And I have to say, all credit goes to devs because they are really trying to fix this particular problem. But sadly, first impressions are first impressions, and that's how it's going to be forever. That doesn't necessarily mean that the game is going to be bad forever, because it's just a first impression, and a game as a product is something that can always be improved upon if the developer so desire. And clearly the desire is there. Okay, so we covered the whole control scheme. Well, what about story? Same as the control situation, the story is also a huge fucking mess. In my first impressions, I mentioned it being disjointed. In other words, it does not possess the usual story elements that are the foundational building blocks of a narrative. Which means that you have a situation when the story starts with something powerful, something that grips you in the beginning, then a lot of things happen in the middle of it, and then you have a proper conclusion. And sure enough, Crimson Desert starts really damn good. You have a compelling reason why things are happening, and I immediately assume that this story is going to be your classical vengeance path. But then, for whatever fucking reason, instead of you following that particular story, the first quest, that is the main quest, asks you to do the following. Try out arm wrestling minigame in this tavern. Give coin to the beggar. Save noblewoman from the sewage. Get a cat from the rooftop. And finally, clean the chimney with the goddamn broom. This is the main quest of this particular game. I shit you not. You can go check it out how it happens. It's just word for word what I already said. Not to mention the main character, that's completely bland, is not really helping you out in order to get into the whole narrative or the story in general. And this might be explained by this article that came out saying that The game had a chaotic development because from a last-minute story to internal power struggle and toxic positivity, the game's issues might run deeper than expected. Basically, there was this story that was all fleshed out, and then the power struggle happened, and then the story was thrown away and was substituted with what we have now. Obviously, we cannot prove these things or verify the identity of people who actually came with the story and shared it with the general public. But I always say, where there is smoke, there is fire. And to me, if you have this particular situation where the story isn't gripping at all and the main character is not helping because his responses to the situation that's happening around him are nonsensical to say the least, you could say that one might expect to have issues going deeper into the whole story and the game itself because there isn't anything gripping or compelling happening. And that's precisely why I have problems with it. So naturally, I went online to see what other people are saying. I mentioned my problems, and the response that I got was as follows. This game is not about the story, you should ignore it because you are playing it wrong. You're supposed to focus on open world, you're supposed to do your random exploration, and you should treat the story as something that's not important at all. I don't know exactly when it happened that most of the people lost their goddamn common sense, but apparently that's a thing now on the internet. I have never seen a situation where somebody would say that the story is there just because it needs to be there and you shouldn't take it into consideration, and that I am playing the game wrong because I'm focusing on it so much. It seems to me that this game, or rather the people that are commenting in this particular ways, especially when it comes to story and controls, have some kind of a cognitive dissonance combined with confirmation bias and tribalism. Or in other words, people are defending their investment and identity rather than evaluating the game objectively. Naturally, you can never evaluate certain elements of the game in an objective manner, so to speak. And obviously we are talking about the story here, which again can be highly subjective. But I'm not talking about this. I'm talking about the construct of the story, which is completely lacking. And that cannot be easily defended in any way, shape or form, because we have already established that the story is lacking those basic building blocks that makes a story a story. And that's basically what I'm arguing here. And I will always take Skyrim, for example, in order to showcase this. So it's pretty much established that the story, or rather the main story of Skyrim, is not that great. However, it possesses all the necessary building blocks in order for someone to point out that this is an actual story. You have the beginning in Helgen where the dragon attacks. There is a continuous incentive from both you and external factors to deal with the dragon situation because it threatens the whole world. And this is how the story is constructed. There is this main narrative that's continuously followed throughout the game. And then you compare the Crimson Desert, and then people say, well, the story gets better after 20 hours or so. So you're telling me that I need to slog through the game 20 hours or something like that, and in the meantime, I gotta kinda construct things into my head and find explanations for the things that are happening because the game is not explicitly saying so, just to get to a point in the game, which is again 20 hours plus or something like that, depending on how you're playing the game, in order to get some kind of a semblance of a story. I know what's going to happen. It's a classical revenge or vengeance story where you want to rebuild everything that you have lost, but the way that it is presented to the narrative, so to speak, is completely atrocious. So obviously first impressions are going to be bad because if I am spending 8 hours playing the game and the game, or at least the story element of it, is completely lacking, I am losing my interest in it because yes, I can do stuff around it, but when I go back to the story, it will be like, why am I doing this? What is my incentive to engage with these people, these NPCs, these story elements, when there is none? And like I said, people obviously attack you because, again, you are a hater, you're playing the game wrong, it's not about the story, it's not about this, it's not about that. Well, turns out, the Pearl Abyss CEO himself admits the story disappointed players even as the game dominates Steam and sells millions. However, the damage has already been done and they cannot revamp the story that easily, so he basically said that he's going to just ignore that element of the game and focus on gameplay because that's more important to them. So, if you don't believe me that the story is bad, there is the man himself, the CEO of the fucking studio, that says that the story isn't that great. So, everything that I was saying was justified, but again, we have the cognitive dissonance that's hitting people left, right, and center, basically preventing them to see the actual problem that I'm pointing out. And I can respect people liking the game. More power to them. I wish I was as oblivious as them in order to enjoy the game, because it seems like there is a lot to do, or at least that's what I am seeing based on the size of the map. But it makes you really wonder. If you let these things slide and you don't really say anything, then who knows, maybe in the future we're gonna get the same slop that we are getting in Crimson Desert when it comes to the story and when it comes to the controls. And hopefully people, or rather developers, are going to have more common sense not to repeat these mistakes, because this would be detrimental to the whole industry and we would basically go backwards instead of forwards when it comes to improving the general systems, most notably user experience through input. Naturally, there are some other things that are not that great when it comes to this game, but it's safe to say that this game is definitely not a masterpiece, nor it deserves the 10 out of 10 or 100 out of 100 score. And when I see people giving these high scores, and I see all the issues that the game has, it makes you really wonder. Are these people gaslighting others on purpose in order to gain something in forms of, I don't know, views, money, prestige, or something else? Or the standards are so low and people are hyped to no end that they don't really see what the hell is going on around them? Because whether or not both of these claims are actually true, the common denominator here is that this is a worrisome behavior. I remember back in the day when the game sucked or there were issues that the game had, you would simply speak them, and then if people would be like, okay, I can live with that, I'm going to play the game, sure. But then there were others who were like, okay, this is something that I can live with, and I don't mind shelling money in order to experience this particular situation. Because this is the core of the problem. People have preferences, but you still need to tell the truth as much as you can and provide facts as objectively as you can, in order to inform the consumer that the product has problems, and then the consumer is going to make a decision whether or not they can live with these particular problems. But today, if you say that the game is bad even in one small element, you are immediately attacked from the other side, which is fanatically defending the game no matter what. And then you have the other side, which is fanatically attacking the game in any way, shape, or form, whether or not there is a problem to begin with. I think this tribalism, like I said before, is going to be the death of all of us, because at the end of the day, this is going to hurt everyone in the future, since if the people or developers who are making the games go something along the lines of, well, these people did this, so I think we can kind of smuggle ourselves and do the same, and then they flop, it's going to be like, oh my god, our game was amazing, but it flopped because of the bad people on the internet. The usual narrative, especially what was happening lately with the games like Concord or that High Guard game or whatever. People are just getting captured in their own bubble. They don't get external information about whether or not the product is good. And then you have a situation where someone spends $200 million on a game that's actually dog shit just because they didn't want to listen to people who actually have experience about these things. That's why you need to playtest these things. And that's why, according to some news outlets, the control scheme was being reported during playtest as problematic, but the developer just refused to acknowledge it or flat out ignored it and just shipped the game as is. And then when the problems occurred, now they are patching it as fast as possible because, why should you do these things before when the problems are already acknowledged, when you can do it afterwards and break yourself and crunch yourself to death in order to fix issues that have already been reported? I really don't understand this way of thinking, and to me, this is just backwards way of doing things, and it can never end up in a good way. And apparently, I have babbled about this so much that I actually completely forgot about any other articles that happened today. You could say that I'm passionate about the situation and I wanted to share my thoughts a bit deeper, but at the end of the day, I don't really mind because, again, raising opinions about these issues can only do good, because my goal has always been, and it always will be, to improve the games for the future generation. Because if we are having these problems now, I really don't want to see them in the future, just because one game did this and then the others are going to get more bolder to do this stupid shit. This goes against any type of common sense, and I really hope that I'm not going to see this situation again. But anyway, it seems that sharing criticism is working, because developers are releasing the patches and fixing things that are broken, and that's always a good sign. Now, they cannot fix the story, and basically it is what it is, but if the rest of the game is enjoyable to a point that you can be like, okay, I can kinda ignore the story because it's dumb, and I can kinda invest 20 hours into the game in order for story to get better along the way, then maybe you could ignore the story, or rather you could just acknowledge that it's shit, but you're playing the game for other reasons because it's giving you less frustration in one department, or in other words, you are having more enjoyment in, let's say, 80% of the game, while 20%, which is the story, is going to be just something that you're going to go over in order to finish it eventually, and that's basically that. I still am not going to jump into the game yet, because right now I am playing Death Stranding 2 and I'm having a blast. But when I'm done with that game, I will probably go back to Crimson Desert to see what's happening, start from fresh. Maybe my second impression is going to be better than the first one, so I reckon I can make a comparison after several patches have landed in order to see whether or not the game actually is more enjoyable than it used to be when it initially launched. Again, if you expected more news, I am sorry, because I got kinda stuck into this particular situation, but I'm sure that people who are watching this are going to forgive me. Kinda, sort of, maybe. Who knows, we will see. You can always bitch down in the comments if you managed to get this far and tell me if I did it good or bad. I do read what people write, and I try to better myself in order to, I suppose, achieve a better quality of this thing, whatever I'm doing. And that's basically it when it comes to the news that I covered this week. Technically, it's only one huge news, but it is what it is. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I encourage you to leave comments. I read all of them, and I'm very happy to interact there with you guys. If you enjoyed this content, consider liking it and subscribing for more discussions like this. And that's it from me, until the next one.